1 week season.
Hello, OWS fam, and welcome to another episode of Bias Check. Coming to you from Chicago, Illinois, is Mr. Prich, as some of my students used to call me. And we this week have a 13-game slate. That is a ton of games to figure out who is optimal, who should we play. It's a number that represents, of course, Taylor Swift, but the Chiefs are not on this slate. This week, we are going to go through all 13 games and check for bias that may be areas that we can exploit or create leverage. I used to do initial thoughts on every game, write up some of the DFS interpretations. And one of the components to my research every week, at least my initial thoughts, was just to try to check in on the bias that may result from each of these games. It's one of my favorite ways to look for biases. I'll do it a few times this year. It is a little bit lengthy, and it is a lot of work to get out before Thursday. But let's dive right in, and let's start with the Atlanta at Carolina game. We have two biases that I can sort of pick out from this game. One continues to be the bias that affects Kyle Pitts and his ownership. Primacy bias would probably be the bias that is affecting our brain, because our brain is going to remember our first perceptions of players. Kyle Pitts, of course, came into the league with a ton of hype, and every year in and year out, he let people down. And so that perception tends to stick. People still don't buy in after two reasonable games. Looking a little bit more into this situation, I found that the pass rate over expectation for Atlanta is one of the lowest in the league through the first two games. Yet, Kyle Pitts has still managed to garner almost the most targets on the team. He is definitely a target of Michael Penix, and he probably will continue to do so entering week 3 at $3,900. I think he is someone that should be on our radar at that price, and that there were some changes that went into this year. And I think we can allow ourselves to continue to view his results this year as being more representative of the player that he is. So I'll be looking to roster some Kyle Pitts this week. Bijan Robinson may be one of the most popular running backs this week. I'm going to introduce a bias here. I'm not exactly sure how strong this bias is in the community, but it is definitely a bias, because Bijan Robinson splits carries, and we all know that volume is king at running back. We are all taught by many of the different subscription sites, fantasy football players and spokesmen, that we should look for volume at running back. Bijan Robinson splits carries with Tyler Algier. And even though they've been splitting carries through the first two games, Bijan has still managed to accumulate a large workload. He's been highly productive. But again, this has come with Atlanta being one of the most rush-heavy teams in the NFL. So what is the bias exactly? A lot of people are going to rush into playing Bijan this week. The matchup is great. And he still has put up 2 good weeks. However, a number of other people will fear the split backfield and what might happen to his carries if they turn more pass heavy, or they just don't have as many plays. Well, I think what we have here is that fantasy managers are falling into what can be called the base rate trap. So we know in general that volume drives this running back scoring. And so we anchor on carries, favorites, we fade any committee back. But when an elite talent like Bijan faces a bottom tier run D, he gets most all of the high leverage touches. If we ignore that context, it's a classic base rate neglect. We are basically punishing Bijan for not fitting the bell cow prototype. I think this week, with that bias at hand, we can take a look at the ownership percentages, and if he is low owned this week for any reason, I think we continue to find ways to roster him at that price and let people who sort of neglect him just based on the fact that he splits carries lose out on the strength of this matchup and his elite talents as a running back. So that's one thing I'll be looking at this week going forward with the Atlanta game. I wanted to also mention this because as I'm looking at bias, all I'm doing is focusing on the Atlanta Falcons team. On the other side, we have a Carolina team who, again, primacy bias or recency bias, we know that they are not a great team in terms of winning, but they do consistently produce good scorers for our DFS contests. I'll be thinking this week, what happens if the game script is flipped this week? What if Carolina leads most of this game? What if Atlanta is not as good as we think after 2 games? And that allows a player like Chuba Hubbard to get his full workload with Carolina playing more from the lead. I'll be looking at that, and not necessarily actionable right now, but just something I'm thinking about. Green Bay at Cleveland is the second game on our docket today. As regards primacy bias, our first look at these teams shows that Cleveland is bad, right? Through 2 games, we probably have that perception that Cleveland is bad and that Green Bay is a Super Bowl contender, right? They dominated Washington. They dominated Detroit. This might be true. We might come to find out as the season progresses that these 2 things are both true. But again, we should not fall into the bias and try to treat these teams like they are finished products. Green Bay is going to go on the road for the first time. Defenses can struggle when away from home. They lost Reed, one of their wide receivers. So while that's going to condense sort of the wide receiver room for Green Bay, it does leave them without one of their playmakers. I think we can look at this game and, again, find ways to continue to roster Green Bay, but with the perception that maybe this defense might be tested just a little bit, and that going on the road, Cleveland's defense has not been so bad. So it's possible that they can keep Green Bay from putting up a huge score on the scoreboard, and this might be a game that makes no waves in the DFS Week 3 contests. Looking at Houston at Jacksonville, the bias that I am aware of with this game has to do with the way that the quarterbacks of this game sort of limit their offenses. We have a narrative bias from Trevor Lawrence. He was called out by his coach for being inaccurate. It was very visible on the video, and whatever he said after the fact does not exclude what viewers of the game, right, people on social media saw. He was basically critiquing Trevor Lawrence for not being accurate, or that's the narrative. Trevor Lawrence also had 3 interceptions so far this year. He has a very low completion rate. So the data kind of matches the narrative. And then on the other side, we have CJ Stroud. The narrative for that team is that he has a bad offensive line. They have no running game. And he has also struggled with accuracy and has struggled to find Nico Collins. Now, what do we do with those narratives? Especially because you, as a DFS player, may lean into that narrative. You may have come into the season with that narrative, and it is being confirmed. So we have a strong bias against these 2 players and therefore against these 2 teams. It should lead to low ownership on this game, on this spot. And we have 2 wide receivers who were drafted in the first round of fantasy drafts, first or second round, Nico Collins and Brian Thomas Jr. People will shy away from playing them in this spot. And whether you think that is the right call or not, it is likely driven by bias, because they were very much held up by the fantasy community before the season. And at this point, I think people are losing faith based on a narrative that they can contribute. Someone will score here, right? They're both very good defenses, which kind of also influences looking at this game. But someone will score here, and if it's not going to be Nico Collins or Brian Thomas Jr., the running games are going to have a hard time getting off the ground. So maybe if it's not the studs, maybe it's the second or the third wide receivers on these teams. I'll be looking deeper into that as the week goes on, and looking at ownership for Nico Collins and Brian Thomas Jr. They are big play guys that only need 1 or 2 plays, right, to lead the slate at their position. So let's not count them out just yet. Cincinnati at Minnesota. In this game, we have a lot of injuries. Both starting quarterbacks are going to be out with injuries. So how do we deal with injuries and what biases do they present? Just to, for those who may not know, right, Jake Browning is going to be the quarterback for Cincinnati, and an old friend, Carson Wentz, is going to be the quarterback for Minnesota. When a star quarterback goes down, there is a perception that the normal offense changes. There's a bias here called status quo bias. Someone might say, well, I like the Bengals with Joe Burrow, but the backup QB is different, right? So I'd rather avoid change and not roster anyone from here. There's also this idea of an aversion to loss. This one's a little bit more complex, but someone might say, if I play a Bengals wide receiver and the backup quarterback struggles, I'm going to feel that loss I'm going to feel that loss. I'm going to feel stupid. I'm going to feel like I made a mistake, more so than enjoying the win if Jake Browning surprises everyone. We fear more the loss than the joy from the win. And so people are likely to avoid this situation because there are injuries, and these teams they think are different. But we have to remember, Jamar Chase put up 39.5 DraftKings points last week after losing Burrows pretty early. So his ceiling still remains, even in a tough matchup against Minnesota, right? They will have to rely on someone, and Jamar Chase is their best player. With regards to the Minnesota side, I keep hearing and remembering that J.J. McCarthy is processing things too slowly. JM keeps saying that as he's watching the tape. So losing J.J. McCarthy for Minnesota might actually be a good thing. I know Carson Wentz is stepping in, and we all have perceptions of him. However, Carson Wentz is a capable quarterback. He's had a few turns in the league where he has provided some good results. Carson Wentz is actually the quarterback I rostered in week 8 of the 2021 season when I took down a $250K prize over 3 contests. So I will not be counting out Carson Wentz, and I will not be counting out these two offenses as Jamar Chase and the studs from Minnesota might go overlooked. All right, moving on to Pittsburgh at New England. Questions have got to be surrounding this Pittsburgh team, questioning whether this Pittsburgh defense is really this bad. They have always been thought of as good, but they've given up 30 points in back-to-back games. They've given up almost 400 yards in back-to-back games, both rushing and receiving, to teams that we might not consider great to start the season. This is a classic recency bias and another term which I'll call base rate neglect. Base rate neglect is basically saying that the base rate is that Pittsburgh is always good, right? We expect good defenses from Pittsburgh. They're always good on defense. And we are neglecting that based on 2 samples. Their price tag is $2,800 this week, which is a very low price. They're facing the New England Patriots and Drake May. We should still not attack Pittsburgh D, and I think we should roster the Pittsburgh defense this week. Looking at New England, there's not much there. However, I'm starting to recognize that a pass funnel defense. Again, the data is only after 2 games, but they've given up back-to-back 300-yard passing games. They've been strong against the run. I do think we need more info here before we start attacking that defense. I'm not looking to attack that defense with Pittsburgh, even though it's Aaron Rodgers back there. The Rams and the Philadelphia Eagles. All right. Philadelphia has, you probably have heard this stat already this week. Philadelphia has 253 yards of passing through 2 games. They're one of the lowest teams for pass rate over expectation. And they run the ball a lot. And so the bias is probably creeping in that possibly A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are dust for this season, that they are never going to get targets. I think this one is a pretty easy bias to challenge and to recognize. We can look at Philadelphia and realize that they are a Super Bowl caliber team. They have a great quarterback, a great running back. They need to be forced to throw the ball. They need to be a team needs to sort of demand that they throw the ball and put themselves in that position. But I just wonder if any team can do that. As I was kind of looking into this matchup and wondering, is this the team that forces Philadelphia to pass? I, again, have unclear. I'm going to keep on looking, keep on hoping, because I think if you could get A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, one or the other, in a stack, you will get very low ownership on that, and they do have high ceiling scores. But last year, the Rams played the Eagles twice, and in both games, Stephon Barkley had over 200 yards rushing in both games. That does not bode well for thinking that the Rams can force them to throw, but it does help us clarify just exactly how we would get to a situation where A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith would be players that we want to roster. The Rams would have to jump out to a lead and force them to throw. That does add clarity by recognizing that bias. All right, on to Game 7, the New York Jets and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The New York Jets have been the most run-heavy team by PROE, and they are playing a team that is built to stuff the run, right? That's what Tampa Bay does so well year in and year out. It seems like an easy offense to avoid. However, if we do this without recognizing it, we fall into a negativity bias. We are giving more weight to the bad team stats rather than looking at the possibilities that exist. And I think people may just negate this game in general, especially if it has a large gap in expected points, which I'm guessing it does. I haven't looked at Team Vegas totals yet. Right? Or we will be sort of stereotyping this as a DFS game based on the type of game we expect. Right? If we expect it to be one-sided, the stereotype is that those games cannot shoot out. Those games cannot produce fantasy winners. But I think Tampa Bay can still be a one-sided stack that can win tourneys. Last year in weeks 17 and in week 6 in 2024, Tampa Bay stacks won the Millionaire Maker over on DraftKings. There's a lot of things that we, if we sort of stereotype this game as low scoring or one-sided, we don't think about garbage time scoring. I mean, Tyrod Taylor is going to likely start for this game. You don't think he's going to be out there, even if the score is up and they're trailing by a lot. You don't think he's going to be out there, trying to accumulate as much yardage, as many stats as he can. And Tampa Bay is usually a pass funnel defense. So I think we have to still consider this game, whether you want to stack only Tampa Bay or find a way to take advantage of a situation where the Jets may be scoring or piling up points in the fourth quarter. Our next game number 8, Indiana at Tennessee. Many people will be asking, are the Colts for real? Right? And this sort of is going to be preying on our understanding of recency bias, or something I call anchoring bias. We anchor to the first information we learned. I talked about this in week 1, that Daniel Jones might not be the same quarterback as he was on the Giants. It looks like he is more skilled, and at least that Indianapolis is able to utilize him a little bit better. But he had many uneven years with the Giants, and we are anchored in that image of Daniel Jones. Even when we have new data, right? The team has not punted through 2 games. Anchoring bias says that we will not move our expectations for that player, right? That or if we move them, it's a conversation like this. Well, Daniel Jones is still the same guy, right? But Indiana's pretty good. Let me sort of see another week. Let me see another week before I roster him, whether they're really for real. And at that point, we sort of maintain the status quo with regards to how we treat Daniel Jones, and we lose out on another big game from his team. So I do think that this week, even against what's considered possibly a tough defense, that we need to be thinking about rostering Daniel Jones and these Indianapolis Colts at low prices. All right, Las Vegas at Washington. This matchup is clouded by a lot of injuries and lack of clarity on the injury front, and sort of a negative buzz on certain players like Ashton Gianti. So there are going to be several classic thinking traps that are going to shape how fantasy players approach this Las Vegas-Washington game. Let's dig into a couple of those. First of all, negativity bias is a much stronger bias in the way that it affects our brains. Bad headlines, right? These injury reports or critical social media posts, disappointing first games, they are very vivid and easy to recall. In fact, people who did not draft Ashton Gianti probably are also having confirmation bias. Yeah, see, I got it right. I knew he wasn't going to be good. Well, we give those negatives more weight than the quieter positives. So I think we need to look more into things like favorable snap count, and improved practice reports, draft capital that they spent on Gianti. And possibly this is the week where he is able to sort of shed some of that early season rust, that rookie rust, and produce a score that is usable. He's only 6.9K, and he's the 8th running back in terms of cost on the DraftKings contests. So let's not forget about Ashton Gianti this week. In addition to this, right, with the injuries, I think what that sparks in my mind and what that sparks in a lot of people's minds is sort of an aversion to risk, right? If Jaden Daniels is injured, Eckler's injured, this team is going to be a little different, right? This cluster of injuries sort of makes the game feel messy. So a lot of people, DFS players, will avoid it entirely to prevent sort of the sting of a bad lineup, right? When you look, if this game does not produce any scores, you'll look back and say, well, see, it was so obvious. It is not obvious before the game starts. And let's not give in to sort of this risk aversion, this messy game, and just leave it alone. So where is the upside in this game? Where can it emerge? That's the question we should be asking, right? Is it Bill, right, the new running back for Washington? Is he going to get some carries that matter? Could Ashton Gianti carry his team in this? Or, right, perhaps there's some hidden upside through Geno Smith in the pass game. I think we need to be looking for the upside here instead of sort of discounting the game for being messy. All right, Denver at the Chargers. This game, the bias for me, or that I notice, is there is a a player on Denver with some unexpected games. Troy Franklin. That is not a name I have heard prior to this season. As we continue to hear about him, I realized, well, yes, he played in college with the quarterback Bo Nix, but he has been producing some pretty good stat lines. And it looks like possibly he's one of their more targeted wide receivers going forward. Again, this is recency bias. It's 2 games. In this case, the coach for Denver usually has wide shifts in the usage of his wide receivers and skill position players from game to game. So even if this is to continue, well, at least we have the understanding, right? The sort of anchor understanding of who the Denver coach is, rather than the recency bias of Troy Franklin producing 2 solid weeks of DFS scores. And I am more likely to hold on to that idea that the coach plays a lot of different people and usage is unpredictable from week to week. New Orleans at Seattle. This is another one I touched on each of the previous 2 weeks as we start to debate Zach Charbonnet versus Ken Walker. We came into the season expecting a bell cow back with a backup running back. We thought Kenny Walker might be that. It has been a split backfield. Kenneth Walker did better in week 2, Charbonnet in week 1. But in this matchup, Seattle is expected for more play volume in this matchup. New Orleans has has lost both of their games. Again, there are biases about their defense, but the Charbonnet versus Walker could be a valuable spot to target in DFS this week if one of them gets more usage than the other. We can't expect that to happen after 2 weeks of a split backfield, but there are some ways that this could be effective that we aren't realizing or that don't follow sort of the coach's decision. Charbonnet popped up with an ankle injury early this week. What if that increases Kenneth Walker's snaps? What if Charbonnet has a questionable tag hanging over him? Right? I feel earlier in the week, if you notice these things and you start thinking about the players earlier in the week, it's easier to make those moves as we come down to it later in the week. So start going through your head, what would happen if Charbonnet was out? Start making rosters based on that. And even if there is a Q tag, right? If Charbonnet's out, Walker's going to be very, very popular, right? It might get a little bit more chalky. But if Charbonnet's in and his usage is held down a little bit because of injury, well, then Kenneth Walker is going to be a great play, right? So no one's going to miss this spot if Charbonnet can't play or if he's ruled out. But let's continue to look for. I just like this spot. I think it's a great place to attack some uncertainty this week and on into the season. Dallas at Chicago. I have a great story here as I live in Chicago and am surrounded by Bears fans. I would have to call myself a Bears fan. I think many Bears fans are Bears fans because they live in Chicago. And right early in the season, there's a lot of hope. So last week, I'm talking to a friend of mine about the first game. Week 1, Chicago was winning 17-7, I think, and of course they lose kind of in dramatic fashion. And the person I'm talking to, as I expect them to, says, "Of course they lose, right? That's what the Bears do. They always lose, despite a new coaching regime, new players." And so this fan, right, is sort of living into this confirmation bias. He's seeing it play out in front of his eyes, and he knows now for the rest of the season, you can't trust these Bears. A lot of Chicago fans have that, but after week 2 of the season, many DFS players have that same perception about the Bears, right? Yeah, they're just not good. Whether that's Caleb Williams, the Bears in general, something about them is off. So let's write them off for the rest of the season. but it is still early. They have a new coach. There are a lot of things that went into play in each of these weeks. And there are some good trends to notice. And I do think the upside for Caleb Williams is pretty high. So I am not going to buy into this sort of negativity bias around the Bears. This week, with them playing Dallas, many people are going to be on the Dallas side. I want to be on the Chicago side. I want to be on Caleb Williams, and I will roster him with some of his stars like Roma Dunze, and maybe put in some bringbacks from the Dallas team. I think this could be an explosive game. And I look at Caleb Williams' elusiveness, his connection with Roma Dunze, and just the fact that the Bears are consistently looking for big plays. Those could hit this week against the Dallas defense that gave up a lot of big plays to Russ Wilson. So let's not write off the Bears, and I'll talk at the end about how I want to use some of that information. All right, Arizona at San Francisco. This for me is similar to the Washington and Vegas game. There are lots of injuries to the 49ers, but we have seen them play through those injuries. We've seen them produce nicely for fantasy the last 2 weeks. Again, we are sort of, as DFS players, if we want to roster the 49ers, I think what we are doing is we are sort of anchoring onto a team identity that Mike Shanahan, right, is sort of the anchor of this team, and he can, even with a lot of injuries, right, he can continue sort of this offensive output of this team. Okay, that is a clear bias that has us playing 49ers players, but at what point do the injuries take a toll that even Mike Shanahan is not able to, work his way out of? So this week, Kyle Juszczyk is going to be injured. Right. George Kittle has always been one of the blocking tight ends. Kyle Juszczyk is the blocking fullback. They are very important to this team and their identity. So let's not forget that some of this team's identity is being taken away through injuries. And it's possible that this week, all of these injuries sort of build up, and San Francisco, has a real offensive struggle. Well, we can take advantage of that with Arizona. They've had 2 easy matchups so far. They haven't really done anything, which is a bias of their own, right? But I think if we assume that a team should stomp on easy opponents, we are also, right, falling into a bias. Call it false causality, something like that. Basically, the low fantasy output of Arizona means that they can't really score when they're facing good teams. In this case, they are facing a good team because they weren't able to put away bad teams, right? They can't score on good teams. Well, believing a team is underperforming is definitely a mental drag, and it can lead you to sort of underweight these players in your lineups. Even when, other important things for DFS sort of stand out. This is an extremely condensed offense. If they were to score a lot of points through the air, if they were, forced to pass, that combination of Kyler Murray, Trey McBride, right, and then Marvin Harrison Jr. is a very condensed offense. It's going to be low owned. So let's not assume that just because they have played poorly or haven't put away 2 easy teams, right, that they can't compete in this case. And if San Francisco, right, still holds on to that team identity, still is scoring, could we have a high scoring game in this matchup? So I'll be looking for those things this week. That was our last game. That was 13 games that we went through. I just want to wrap up and do a recap real quick on how I plan to use this information this week. I plan to use this information in my handling of a popular Bijan Robinson this week. I think he will attract ownership, and I think that if he does attract ownership, and it's too much, I will likely lean into that idea that this is a split backfield, and hope that Atlanta is forced to pass more in this game, putting some of their pass catchers like Kyle Pitts and Drake London into play, and possibly, if I want to attack this game, building lineups that way, so that I don't roster a running back in a split backfield, even though, right, they have all of those positive traits. If Bijan is low owned, I'll probably look to that other tact that, right, even though this is a split backfield, Bijan Robinson has great value with his skills, his elite talents, and his role on this team. Again, bias does not sort of prescribe exactly how to build rosters. It just gives you ways to make decisions that are outside of the biases. So looking at this, I'm pretty sure Jamar Chase is going to be low owned. So I want to take advantage of that. Again, if he is not low owned, I will be surprised. But one way to play this right is he's right next to Price of all the elite receivers. Like CeeDee Lamb is going to be popular this week, I'm guessing, with Dallas stacks. Well, why not? If you're going to play Jamar Chase, why not play Jamar Chase and someone like Javonte Williams, hoping that the touchdowns for Dallas come through Javonte and not CeeDee Lamb, thereby sort of getting a little leverage on those who own CeeDee Lamb, and kind of exploiting that idea of rostering Jamar Chase. I am going to keep playing the Pittsburgh defense this week. I am not worried that they gave up so many points and so many yards in the first 2 weeks. Again, I don't know if they are still a good defense, but there's a clear bias that will be against them. Their price has dropped. Let's take advantage of that. I also will be playing Tampa Bay stacks with no bringbacks. They have shown many times over the last couple seasons that they are a team that can produce high scores even without the other team scoring on them. In addition, I will be looking to play some pieces of the Jets in these Tampa Bay stacks in the event that, right, they score during garbage time. That Tampa Bay sort of smothers them for most of the game, but some of their players are able to produce good results in the fourth quarter. I'm also going to jump on the Indianapolis offense while there is still time. I want to catch them this week while their ownership and prices are still low. They are a team that can seemingly score with anyone, right? They played a tough Denver defense last week. So I want to be in early on the Indianapolis offense while there's still time. I will be rostering Ashton Gianti this week. It is week 3 as a rookie. He has disappointed in 2 weeks. That has happened. I think in week 1 of this podcast, I looked at some of the rookies from 2024 and just how long it took them to really produce a fantasy usable score. For many of them, it was week 2, week 3, even week 5. So I'll be starting to increase my ownership of Ashton Gianti. And then finally, I talked about that Chicago-Dallas game. I'll be playing the Chicago side of that, hoping that people are scared off from Caleb Williams. I know that Rome Odunze is going to garner a lot of ownership, so let's find ways to build rosters with Rome Odunze that are less owned. All right, that is 13 games. That is going to do it for this week's bias check. As always, please reach out to me in the Discord. Reach out to me on X at Matthew Petrich 1, and I will see you at the top of the leaderboards. Have a great week, everyone.